All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Discovering Multifamily podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Anthony Scandariato with Red Knight Properties. And today we have a special guest here, Anthony Toth. And Anthony was introduced to us by a mutual friend of ours out of Michigan, who we actually use a lot of different investment software products. His company is called InvestNext. So shout out to Brad St. Ange. And Anthony has a very interesting story, and I think he'd be a great guest for this show. He is focused on multifamily. However, he's had experience in many different real estate asset classes. And he had a full-time job and he worked for another, you know, real estate operator. But for those of you who know my story, kind of very similar and it's kind of weird. We have the same first name. So we'll have a lot in common here. But, the focus of this show is to highlight how Anthony, how old are you, Ant?
34.
34.
Yeah.
He was able to leave at 30, 31. His full-time?
Yeah,
Okay.
31.
At 31, leave his full-time W-2 job and pursue real estate investing, specifically, focusing on multifamily. And he's got some other things he'll mention as well. He's the co-founder and CEO at Dynasty Investment Partners. He is a partner of Riyaz Sharif and has a good reputation. And, he used to be on the baseball team at the University of Michigan, and like I said, he's based in Ann Arbor, and at his other job, he was responsible for asset management acquisitions and kind of learned the ins and outs of more than 4,000 multifamily apartment units, and then had some office and retail experience. So, like I said, for those of you who know my story, it sounds like it might be a little similar to Anthony, but really excited to have him on the show. Hopefully he's an inspiration to anybody listening. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always fun to talk to another Anthony, especially one of the Anthonys that doesn't go by Tony. So with both of us having that in common too.
People ask me, hey, do you want to be called Tony? And I just turned to them. I said, do I look like a Tony? And they're like, nah, not really.
Yeah, same with the last name, like Toth. Tony Toth just does not have a ring to it whatsoever. So we nipped that in the bud at an early age.
That's awesome. So yeah, I would love to. You graduated in 2011. So did you find this job right outside of school?
Yeah. So, you mentioned on the intro, thanks for the intro, by the way, that, I played baseball at Michigan, and, commercial real estate really wasn't in the cards for me. I was planning on getting drafted and playing professionally. And 2 weeks before the MLB draft in 2011, broke my tibia. So that those dreams kind of stopped immediately, abruptly. And, I got into kind of the property management and asset management roles in commercial real estate right away, right out of school. Really learning the ins and outs kind of from the ground level, how all these different assets function, and super thankful for that kind of foundation of knowledge, from really an early age.
That's awesome. So obviously you learned a lot while you were there. So what was the steps leading up to starting Dynasty? Like, why did you want to start that? Was there any light bulb that went off while you were at your previous company?
Yeah. So the first gig as soon as I graduated school, like I mentioned, was really that property management, asset management role, and it was really a gig that I had no business getting. To be honest with you, I basically had a contact that I shadowed for a day, went to interview for a role simply to practice interviewing skills because I had never done it before. And the company was out of Ann Arbor, was looking for someone with seven years experience, and somehow, some way, they gave me the job. So it was very much a sink or swim scenario from 2000. This would have been 2011 to 2015, and that's when I kind of cut my teeth and really started to learn, the property management and asset management side of the business. And then in 2015. I joined and became a partner at a private equity shop out of Ann Arbor, where I oversaw the operations of our main investment funds that at its peak was about 350 million in valued real estate, 3 million plus square feet of just about every asset class. I mean, we were heavy industrial, heavy multi-tenant office, multifamily, and retail. And that's where kind of this passion for the private equity space and really investing in real estate kind of really took off and grew. learned a ton, had a lot of responsibilities and wore a lot of hats with that company from 2015 to 2020, and just realized that, hey, there's some niches that I want to focus on, which is just multifamily, and that led into the high end short term rentals that we're doing now. But I wanted to do it on my own, with my own investors, and kind of run the show my way, how I wanted to do things. And that's kind of the story that led up to Riaz and I finding and establishing Dynasty back in 2021. Yeah.
Okay, so it hasn't been super long, but it's was the Dynasty idea or concept or in process while you were working as well?
It was in
Okay.
process for probably about 6 or 7 months prior to actually starting the company,
Okay.
when we found our first deal. But yeah, it was always, for years prior to starting Dynasty, it was always a goal of mine to build, own, and operate my own portfolio. Riaz and I met through a mutual acquaintance. We have talents and levels of expertise that are opposite but balance each other really well, and it was just a good fit, and it's been off to the races ever since.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what did that look like? So you guys came up with the idea. Obviously, you saw how the company you were working for was structuring the deals, and you had the property
Right.
management experience beforehand.
Right.
So that's property management's, as you know, super important, probably
Yeah.
more than the deal structuring. But it depends who
Yeah.
you ask.
Right.
Um, and so you learned all that, and you were like, well, yeah, let me see how I can do some deals on my own. Was it the fact that you got the first deal under contract, or did you close it and then you were like, "Hey, employer, see ya, I'm out of here." What what did that process look like?
Yeah, so I'm a commercial broker as well. So there was this gap of leaving the old company where I just did some brokerage for a little bit before Dynasty was actually founded. But it was definitely Dynasty was formed. We branded the company. We kind of had our partnership structure in place, and then we went out and started hunting deals. And I'd say the biggest difference for our first deal than maybe most multifamily investors that are just getting started is, we were it wasn't a 4, 5, 6 unit type deal. Our first acquisition was 62 units, and I don't suggest that everybody that's just getting into this starts with that size of an asset from the jump. Um, it's just that, thankfully, I was fortunate enough to have this experience under somebody else's company of how to operate in this business. So we were able to just bite off a bigger chunk from the get go, than maybe if I didn't have that prior experience.
Okay, so talk to us about that. Was that deal in Michigan, local to you?
Yeah, yeah. So we're based in Detroit. That's where I lived. I spent 16 years in Ann Arbor, and moved to the east side of Detroit here about a year and some months ago. Um, but this was a deal that was actually brought to us by a commercial wholesaler that grew up in Detroit, and it was his first attempt at wholesaling a commercial deal. He had wholesaled plenty of single family, and found a great off market property, put it under contract, flipped the paper to us, and it was just a value add deal that there was too much juice in it to say no to. I mean, this was a 62 unit deal that, the owner was a Czech immigrant that moved to the country in 1990. He bought this property for 384 grand. Think about that, 62 units for 384 grand. Back in 1994, it was debt free. He was completely debt free, no note on it. Starting in 1999, he lived there. He was the one changing the light bulbs, fixing the radiators, all that fun stuff, and just kept the thing completely occupied at 50 to 60% below market rental rates, and didn't really put a lot of capital back into the deal. And it was well located on the border of Detroit and Detroit's eastern suburb, which is Grosse Pointe, which is one of the most affluent communities in Michigan. So it was located well. It had a ton of upside, and it was just something that we couldn't say no to. So I looked to one of my contacts in my network from my prior company, that we did a JV with. That he came in and sponsored the debt. He signed on the debt, and we formed a partnership where we essentially ran the deal from there.
That's great. And you still have that deal in your portfolio?
We do. It's still in the portfolio. We we vacated a lot of the buildings, turned over the rent roll, increased rents by we're 20 to 30%. We're getting ready to increase them again now that tenants are coming up for renewal. But these were tenants that were living in the building that were not on leases. Everyone was month to month. The prior owner used lease applications as leases, so it was kind of a cluster, if you will, from takeover. But that's some of those deals that where you have to get your hands the dirtiest are the ones with the most value, and that's just one of the many reasons why we decided to attack that deal for our first one.
No, that's awesome. That archetype deal profile is usually the best.
Yeah,
And that's what we try to find as well.
sure.
Have you found a lot of opportunities like that, or was that a little bit more of a diamond in the rough? They're out there. We found them, but
They're out there. They're out there for sure. We've had that's probably the biggest value add and the heaviest lift in our portfolio by far. I shouldn't say probably. It is without a doubt. The other stuff within our portfolio is more stabilized. We have a 72 unit portfolio in the heart of Midtown Detroit, which is one of Detroit's top most desirable neighborhoods, and that one's completely different. Where we bought it from the original developer. It was built in 2012. There's two older buildings that were built in the 1900s that came with that portfolio, but those older buildings got rehabbed in 2016. So the actual construction quality of the asset is tip top. It was just mismanaged where rents were below market. So that's a little different. And then our other stuff in Detroit was a lot of it. The heavy physical lifting of the actual rehab was kind of done. It was more of an operational type situation where the value was added through just management of the asset, as opposed to a bunch of renovations and all that fun stuff.
and you mentioned you have a partner. How did you talked a little bit about him. How did you
Yeah,
guys meet each other and decided is he full time as well?
sure. Yeah. So he's both of us are 99.9% full-time. Dynasty is our baby, and that's what we focus on. So Riaz Sheriff, who's also a native of suburb of Detroit and Canton, Michigan. Him and I met through a mutual acquaintance, completely by chance. His background is more in business operations and the residential single family sales world. So he has his own team within the Keller Williams umbrella that he's been operating for 7 years. Very high performer that way, and but knew that he wanted to get out of the transaction to transaction type career, and that commercial real estate was the way to build wealth, build that passive income stream, create generational wealth. And he has a heavy mind when it comes to marketing and branding, which I don't. He has a heavy mind when it comes to building teams and teams of people, which I don't. I'm more of the deal junkie, the structure guy, the raising equity guy, and those areas of expertise completely opposite, but work very well together. And it just made sense to rock and roll, and that's what we did.
So you guys have traditional multifamily apartments under your assets under management, and you mentioned high-end short-term rentals.
Yeah, we have high-end short-term rentals. We actually have 6 short-term rental units in Brush Park, Detroit, which again, probably the busiest neighborhood in Detroit as far as development and high-end development too. So we took a multifamily building, 6 units there, and are running that as short-term rentals. Detroit's severely underbuilt when it comes to hotels and Airbnbs. And we have all these events coming up. We have the Formula One Grand Prix that's downtown. We have the 2024 NFL draft that's coming to Detroit. We have 2027 Final Four, NCAA Final Four that's coming to Detroit, and everyone's freaking out because it's like, where the heck is everybody going to stay? We have to go out like a 20 or 25-mile radius from the city uh, in order to have the amount of hotel rooms in order to meet the demand here. So that's why we decided to run the short-term rentals in Detroit. And then we've also expanded into the panhandle of Florida and have a portfolio of high-end multi-million dollar like luxury single family homes that are run as short-term rentals as well. And we're really focused on in that market because we think there's a ton of opportunity and protection from downside on the panhandle of Florida where we're at.
And it is, did you make the decision to expand into Florida for diversification reasons or?
Definitely diversification reasons. It's an area in Florida called 30A, which is this 2-lane highway that hugs the Gulf of Mexico and connects basically Destin, Florida, if you've ever heard of it, to almost Panama City. And it's where, kind of the upper middle class from the southern states go to vacation. And it's an area that my parents, and again, I grew up in Cleveland, and my parents and I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So we didn't really have ties to the panhandle of Florida. It's just a place that our family had vacationed for a few years prior to my wife and I having kids. And beautiful area. At first, I had all the hesitations in the world to not go down to the panhandle. Didn't know anything about it, didn't know what it looked like. And when I got there, was just kind of blown away. It was sugar white sand beaches and emerald, almost Caribbean-esque type waters. And when we went down there again this past June, I guess it was June of 22, everything that's going on there from a development perspective, the infrastructure that's there to run short-term rentals, that economy down there is built on short-term rentals and dependent on that. It was just one of those aha moments where it's, hey, if we don't take our business model that we're using to syndicate multifamily deals and do it down here, we're missing out on too good of an opportunity. And there's so much built-in protection down there that it was just one of those things where we couldn't not do it.
That's awesome. And so what percentage of your portfolio is the multifamily versus short-term rentals?
90% of the portfolio is multifamily, 10% is short-term rentals. But I do think that the short-term rentals is going to be a heavier focus for us in the next 12 to 18 months, just because of the cash flow that we can pump from those compared to long-term rentals. But you never know. We like you, right? I mean, we're underwriting and looking at hundreds of deals a month to try and find, the one or two that make sense to bring to our investors. And we're not just underwriting and looking at short-term rentals. We're looking at multifamily deals as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, I haven't heard of a lot of sponsors in the Detroit metro area. So I think you have maybe an advantage there. I haven't heard many sponsors who live in Florida that are investing up there.
Yeah.
Yes. Or in other states. So if you mentioned you're a broker too, I'm sure you're leveraging that.
Right.
As we kind of, conclude the podcast, what would you say to someone who's kind of maybe looking to invest in real estate, full time and is, has some experience in terms of maybe professionally or just education wise, listening to whatever this show or other shows and reading books, but they are nervous to kind of pull the trigger. Like you've had a lot of confidence just because of everything you spoke about here. What was like the one piece of advice you would say to someone who's looking to do this full time that's in a similar situation, or maybe a little bit different than you were?
Sure. Yeah. And I think about this a lot, and I kick myself a lot because of it. If my biggest advice to someone who has, like you said, a level of education and an understanding of how this business works and how real estate investment works, my biggest advice is to just fricking do it. Like we're a lot more capable of investing in real estate ourselves than probably we give ourselves credit for. we can listen to podcasts, we can read books, we can study how other individuals have done it, but nothing teaches you like experience does. We're going to learn from our successes, and we're going to learn even more from our failures. But if you're not in it, entrenched in it, and doing it, you're never going to have and gain that experience to really take off and scale your business. So do it. If you're hesitant about starting it and jumping in full time and doing your first deal or your first couple deals, you're ready. You're more ready than you think you are. Just do it.
Yeah, love that last piece of advice. And for anyone looking to connect with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, they can visit our company website, which is www.investdynasty.com, or they can also feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is my first name, Anthony@investdynasty.com. They can also follow me. We're heavy on social media too, on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, TikTok. We're out there. So yeah.
Nice. Well, we'll have a link to Anthony's website as well as his social media in our social media descriptions as well, and on iTunes. And if you liked what you heard and or saw today, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. It would help the two Anthony's get our message out to a greater audience. So we really appreciate that. And looking forward to keeping tabs on what you're up to and connecting again in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Really appreciate you having me on. Love what you got going on, and would love to touch base with you again here sometime in the future.
All right. Thank you.